There's some beautiful studies now with teachers and students putting EEG systems on all of the students and all of the teachers and showing that the students who are connected to the teachers, their brainwaves actually sync up. So our brains oscillate all the time. But when teachers and the students are actually connected and they're in the classroom together, their brains start oscillating together. And during that period that they're actually oscillating together, the students actually learn the information the teacher's actually teaching them. But that synchronization only happens if the teacher's connected to the student, if there's actually a relationship there. The kids that don't have a good relationship with the teacher, they don't ever get into that synchronization and they don't actually learn as well from the teacher. So it's so important that we actually have that relationship and we create that relationship through all those things, through the oxytocin, through the serotonin. Whereas when we're online, we only get dopamine because we get a hit of dopamine because we see a face, but we don't actually get anything else. And dopamine's not very good for connection, and it actually just gives us this really short hit like we get when we win gambling or we win a prize or do those sorts of things. But it's not very sustaining, not very good for us. So those are a few of them, Brian. I can keep going, but I'll leave it at those few things. But there's a whole bunch of neurotransmitters.
I'm willing to let you keep going, sir. I'm willing to hear. I'm actually like, well, one of the things that I'm kind of fascinated by, and aside from touch, which in and of itself is fascinating to think about. But the other things that you kind of mentioned were very visual. And the thing that's interesting to me is I talked to an online teacher who's been teaching online for a long time. And they said to me that it's much more of an auditory phenomenon than it is a visual phenomenon. They can't look out over the class and see who's paying attention, right? And they have to kind of listen into the person's voice to understand how they're feeling. So that's kind of fascinating to me. The question I have, though, and it's sad that Joe's not here because he is the teacher relationship guy, but I was talking to a principal not too long ago, and they said one of the things that makes in-person education amazing is that the teacher can form a relationship with the student and use that relationship to motivate the student. So the relationship comes from these in-person chemical releases. The chemical releases give us trust, they give us bonding, and then the teacher can utilize that relationship in order to inspire the student, motivate the student. Is that sort of the part of the gist of what you're saying as well? And is there any nuances in there?
But there is a whole bunch of nuances. So you've got to actually create that relationship between the two. And that requires a teacher to actually be vulnerable so that the student can actually see that the teacher is actually a person and they're actually somebody who actually cares about them. Because what you need to do is create an environment where the student actually feels as though they're part of your in-group as a teacher. So you're all part of the one in-group, because we know people don't learn from people who aren't in their in-group. And we actually hear people differently if you're not part of their in-group. You literally hear things differently. And we perceive facial expressions differently based on whether or not we like the person or not, or whether we actually are connected to the person. So if you are connected with someone and they're part of your in-group, you see a happy face as a happy face, and you get all these neurotransmitters that make you feel happy as well. So that's contagious. If someone smiles and you don't see them as part of your in-group, you actually see it as a smirk, and your brain responds to it as though they're actually angry. So if you're not connected with your teacher and they come in smiling, you're going to process that like they're actually angry, and you're going to actually have your physiological response, that is your fight or flight response, will go off. So you've got to have that connection with them. Otherwise, they're not going to hear what you say the same way. They're not going to see you in the same way. We actually find people who are in our in-group are also more attractive. So we're actually more willing to actually listen to them from that point of view as well. But you're going to perceive their facial expressions and their body language differently. And so therefore you're not going to be willing to listen to them. And we know that's true. There's lots of evidence now that's so important for us to actually learn from them, which makes sense because we actually learn really quickly and we learn really easily from somebody else. And so we don't want to learn from people who aren't part of our in-group, because they might be teaching us something that we can't trust, that isn't going to be good. So we've evolved this really neat mechanism to go, these are the people I'm willing to learn from, and these are the people that are okay to learn from. And anybody over here aren't people. They're people that I can't trust, and therefore I'm not going to learn from. And so you don't learn from those people.
Is that in-group favoritism? Is that what that's called? Is that the phenomenon?
Yeah, in-group versus out-group perception, yeah. And it is hardwired within us, and we need to realize it. But the important thing is that changes, right? Our in-group actually changes based on what our situation and how we're perceiving the world. So those teachers that can create a classroom where everybody feels as though they're part of that classroom and they're part of that in-group and they're all getting along. All those students, and I'm sure you both know, right? All those students learn and they're all happy to be there. But if you've got an environment where the students don't actually feel as though they're part of that classroom, and I work with a lot of teachers who have these environments where, there's little groups, there's little pockets of kids who don't feel as though they're part of their own little group, right? And so they'll learn from each other, but they won't learn from the teacher and won't learn from the class.